saying we can only verify what we truly see. So we shouldn't speculate on stuff that we don't know. So the scholastic method of speculating on stuff that we don't know about, that's not empirical. That's called speculation. I do want to let William in because he is Catholic, and I'd love to get his perspective on this. William, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Hey, Jim. I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good. Were you able to listen to the last half hour or so of the show?
More or less, yes. I had some comments to add. First and foremost, I think when it comes to, I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm just speaking to the average kind of viewer or person who might hear this in the future. I think for the average person, it really helps to take into context when we compare these different theological schools of thought and like compare and contrast them. We have to remember that none of these were written in English, and they were written very long ago, right? And when we compare and contrast them in English, I think, which you can do, right? But I think it really helps to read the text in the original language.
I agree with you. Because,
yeah.
I'm sorry not to interrupt, but a lot of these guys that I'm critiquing, they themselves just go on, Aquinas.com and just blurt out whatever's there. But both he and Augustine said, in addition to the language barrier you're talking about, that they weren't perfect. And so there is room for debate. And I wanted to ask you really quick, William, before I forget. You yourself are Catholic, and I said quite a lot on the stream that I approached this latter half of the stream as if I was Catholic, and yet being Catholic, you still end up disagreeing with a lot of what Aquinas says because that's not held by the magisterium. So do you run in these like Thomist circles? You know any of these guys, or is this just something you're not that involved with?
Well, no, because most of my interaction with Catholics is not on the internet because I'm a normal person. So
Good.
No, because most of the people that are in my parish where I go to mass, obviously we talk about theology because I think that's a very manly thing to do, but it's not like this hyper. Because that's borderline idol worship, like what these people on the internet do when they overemphasize a certain theologian. Protestants especially do that. That's literally the bread and butter of their religion, with like John Calvin and founding whole religions upon one, theologian, right? So we got to be careful with that. But I guess because like when you see like at least in how I observe it, when you see like when the Catholics criticize the Orthodox for like being too spiritual, it's like, and then vice versa, when the Orthodox criticize the Catholics for being too like blunt and rational and not spiritual, like it does take into account, like when you learn Latin and you learn Greek and you learn the sound of the language, you learn the syntax and everything, you see, okay, Latin it is a blunt and sort of rational language, like that's just that's the nature of Latin. And then Greek is more like fluid and has like this sort of like, they have longer words and it's just more spiritual,
Dude, there's some Greek words that are like 30 letters long. And then Two Crooks, I'll let you talk. I just want to say one thing real quick. William, I do appreciate that a lot. And I will say that that's why it's important to have a real life relationship with people, because 99.999% of Catholics on earth do not know, care, and if they did know and did care about this stuff, they would probably think you're like a lunatic for bringing it up. Most Catholics are themselves quite spiritual, and their religion's about a connection with God, not about sitting at a desk. So if you think sitting at a desk is going to give you salvation, it's not. Anyway, go ahead.
But I also wanted to talk about natural theology, because I do believe in natural theology, but I think a lot of people like don't exactly understand. This might be one part that Aquinas talked about, but I think people don't realize what he was really getting at, because I find that like with natural theology, because it's not about like oh well, of course, like everyone was worshiping one God. That's not really the point. Not everyone was worshiping, the triune God Yahweh. That's not what we're saying. I guess what St. Thomas Aquinas says is that like any human being on the earth, like any able-minded human being, can observe the natural world and notice that there's design, right? First and foremost, like everything you could see is ordered in some fashion, and you can come to the conclusion that something put it here, more or less. I mean, obviously the words you can argue is maybe some semantics, but I think the idea, you can see what I'm getting at. And also I think that and what I really resonate with that is because I think it shows how God wants us to take in his creation. And I think that that's what I actually resonate a lot with that school of thought. And I just think a lot of people misunderstand.
It's a nuanced way of mentioning it. I do want to cut you off just for a second because I know Two Crooks wanted to say something. Crook, what did you want to mention?
Just this whole idea that when it comes to discussing theologians and philosophers, a lot of people do the fallacy that they do with the American founding fathers in particular, where they assume they all agreed on the same things. So, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates are going to have some disagreements. Theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine are going to have disagreements. So this idea that a lot of people can't distinguish their beliefs, and even I can't sometimes distinguish them at times, it does affect discussions and why some people can talk over each other. But another thing I also wanted to mention is that in regards to St. Thomas Aquinas, in the East, I mentioned this previously, but for some people in the chat to know who haven't heard of it, there seems to be this misconception that St. Thomas was the Catholic Western Christian philosopher and Augustine is the Eastern Christian philosopher. It's basically Facebook theology, Facebook history, but some people do make that misconception. So that could be why some people, Orthodox Christians as well, or even some Eastern Catholics for some reason, just reject St. Thomas Aquinas. Like, oh no, he's the European Christian and whatever. Of course, he's drawing on Greek philosophy, but St. Augustine does as well, and St. Augustine is a Berber. I don't know. It's just funny that people make that easy mistake.
I agree. Hello, you're in the chat with us. What did you want to discuss?
So, I wanted to address what you guys were talking about in regards to, let's say, the difference between the scholastic conception of, well, basically gnoseology, because behind the, let's say, criticism that we Orthodox make of the Catholic position, there is an actual anthropological point that is missed, which is, of course, our faith describes, let's say, a metaphysical reality that is fractal in the sense that, let's say, all of the scriptures testify to the truth of God, and they have different senses, and one of those senses is the spiritual. And when you see something in a narrative, you can also use it to, let's say, assess a spiritual process going on inside a person, which is fundamentally gnoseological, which is basically how God reveals himself to us. The problem between, let's say, St. Gregory Palamas and Barlaam wasn't just because of an explanation about, let's say, the spirituality. It was about the spirituality itself being lived out. St. Gregory Palamas was defending hesychasm, and hesychasm basically states that you can know God inside of yourself as you, let's say, purify your nous, as you purify your mind, as you purify your spirit, and as your spirit and your heart commune inside of you, right? So basically, discursive reason for us Orthodox is a lower anthropological, let's say, power that is given to us. It's lower than the spirit, lower than the highest aspect of our soul. So when we're defending hesychasm, what we're basically defending is a different gnoseological framework, a different understanding of how it is that we know God. So it's not just merely us being, let's say, too ideologically, let's say, rigorous in regards to, let's say, our vision of how we know God versus another, but rather what was already revealed in the tradition. So St. Gregory Palamas is not, let's say, inventing wholesale a new, let's say, conception of how we know God, but rather he's putting into words, he's developing in the sense of like putting into words what the, let's say, especially Middle Eastern fathers had already apprehended through practice. So that's basically the point that we Orthodox are trying to make if we understand what we're talking about. Of course, there are Orthodox people who don't know what they're talking about and just like parrot other people's, let's say, talking points. But it's not just us like trying to out scholastic the scholastics.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you.
Like that was Yeah, go ahead, Gene.
No, I was just gonna say that's definitely 100% true. It's not just a different, debate. It's a different whole supposition of how you get into it. And like I said, I think that Catholicism was smart to move a little bit away from that. So before Aquinas and before the scholastics that were before him, the Catholic Church was still legalistic, but it was also very spiritual. Then they had a very hard turn into scholasticism, which, it produced a lot of good stuff for them technologically, in terms of society and progress and stuff like that. It was good in terms of studying scripture in a way. It was very helpful for them as well. But then they went a lot, from our perspective, they went way too far, got away from empiricism and too much into speculation. So you're right that it's a different way of approaching theology and kind of a different way of knowing your own knowledge. So I always say, there's a comment here that said the East and the West balance each other. That is true. There are good things that each one learns from one another. And before the 850s, Western theology was part of the Orthodox Church too. So there's good stuff over there too. What we want is to have a united theology where everybody agrees on the same experiential version of religion. So I don't mean to just end abruptly, but I do need to get going, guys. So thank you very much for coming in. I know
All good.
You didn't all get a ton of time to talk, but I do got ahead. But this was a really good one. I wanted to mention this, and if anyone was wondering what the context of this topic is because Christian B. Wagner, maybe not he himself, but some of his followers like Astro and Hassan were having a back and forth with Sam Shamoun. And Sam Shamoun had a huge problem with their rejection of the theophanies, and they just went back and forth for a while. Actually, Sam got very upset about the metaphysical stuff. So who knows? Maybe he had a taste of the gene pill. But anyway, I did Skype with him just on a message. So he, if the conversation goes into something interesting, I'll let you guys know. But yeah, for now, I do need to get going. But thank you all for coming on here.
Thank you.
I'll
Thanks,
probably
Jim.
stream later in the week.